The morning started like any other in October, with Marcus Chen standing on the weathered porch of his family's ranch, coffee cup warming his calloused hands. 43 years old, with the permanent squint lines of a man who'd spent his life under open sky, Marcus had inherited this 280-acre spread from his father 5 years ago. It wasn't glamorous. The fences needed mending, the barn roof had seen better decades, and the cattle herd had dwindled to 50 head. But it was his. Every inch of it meant something. He'd grown up on this land. His daughter, Lily, rode horses here as a girl. His wife, Sarah, had left him here alone 18 months ago, unable to handle the isolation and the debt that came with farming in modern times. The ranch was all that kept Marcus moving forward on the dark mornings. The property line was marked clearly, a chain-link fence that separated his land from the neighborhood development on the other side. 5 years ago, the developers had promised the homes wouldn't ruin the rural character. 5 years later, there were 18 suburban houses crowded against his fence, and every one of them wanted a piece of his peace. But none of them wanted a piece quite like Victoria Harmon. She'd moved in 6 months ago, buying the corner property adjacent to Marcus's northwest pasture. The house was a gleaming 2-story monument to disposable income, limestone facade, pristine landscaping, the kind of place that screamed, "I'm not from here." Victoria had the appearance to match. Expensively cut blonde hair, designer workout gear even when she wasn't working out, and the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus had tried to be neighborly. He'd waved. He'd introduced himself. She'd looked at him like he was something stuck to her shoe. The drought had come in July, severe, relentless. His well had dropped 2 feet below normal. He'd had to ration water for the cattle, shorten the grazing rotation, cut back on irrigating the hayfields. It was tight, but manageable if he was careful. He'd managed through worse. That's when he noticed the hose. It was a 3/4-inch irrigation line. Forest green, snaking from somewhere near his property toward the fence line, disappearing into Victoria's yard. Marcus first spotted it on a Tuesday in late August when he was checking on a cow that had gotten tangled in wire. He'd traced it back, half convinced he was seeing things. The hose came from his back pasture, emerging from a line he didn't remember installing, running right through a gap in the fence that definitely hadn't been there before. Someone had cut it. Someone had cut his fence and run his water to the other side. His first instinct was anger, pure, hot rage. His second instinct was to yank the hose out and cut it into pieces. His third, calmer instinct was to do something smarter. He closed off the line without disturbing anything. He wanted to know for certain who was behind this. It took one afternoon of watching from his truck, parked casually near the fence, to confirm it. Victoria came out at 4 p.m., turned a valve Marcus hadn't seen before, and began watering her yard. Her already green yard. Her obscenely green yard in the middle of a drought. Marcus drove directly to her front door. She answered in white linen shorts and a silk blouse, a glass of something clear and expensive in her hand. Her expression cycled through surprise, annoyance, and amusement. "Marcus, right? The farmer?" She said it like he'd just told her he was a circus performer. "Victoria, we need to talk about the hose." Her eyes flickered just for a moment. But then the smile returned, sharper this time. "What hose?" "The one you ran from my property to yours. Through my fence. Using my water." "I don't know anything about that." She took a sip from her glass. "But if there is one, maybe you should check your lines." "Seems like you've got a leak, Victoria." "I'm busy, Marcus." "Was there anything else?" She closed the door. Just like that. Marcus stood there on her front porch for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process the casual audacity of it. She'd stolen from him and then lied to his face. He could have called the police. He should have called the police. But something stopped him. Pride, maybe. Or the knowledge that small-town cops didn't care much about what happened between neighbors unless blood was involved. He went home and called a lawyer. The lawyer, a tired woman named Patricia who worked out of an office in town, told him the truth. Proving water theft was complicated. He could pursue it civilly, but it would take time and money he didn't have. Could take months. The cops probably wouldn't get involved without a formal complaint, and even then they'd see it as a civil dispute. "How much water?" she asked, Marcus had done the math. 3/4-inch line running conservatively 6 hours a day for a month. Maybe 800 gallons a day. Call it 4,000 a week. Patricia did some mental arithmetic. At your local water rates, that's probably $50-60 a week. Even if you won, she'd pay the fine and move on. The legal fees alone would cost you $3 grand. Marcus hung up and stood in his kitchen for an hour, staring at nothing. The hose stayed in place for another week. He left it there while he thought about his options. He considered confronting her again. He considered calling the sheriff. He considered cutting the hose and leaving it at her front door with a note. But none of those options felt right. They all felt like they'd escalate things, like they'd turn his quiet ranch life into something ugly and drawn out. Then he remembered his cows. They were creatures of habit, his herd. They knew the fence line, knew where the water troughs were, knew the rotation of pastures. They also had long memories and strong opinions about unfamiliar territory. An idea started forming, dark and perfect and terrible. The hose kept flowing for another 2 weeks while Marcus prepared. He didn't interfere with it. He let Victoria grow accustomed to her easy theft, to taking what didn't belong to her, to believing she'd gotten away with it. People like her always believed they'd gotten away with things. They never expected consequences. On the morning of October 15th, just before dawn, Marcus drove his truck to the back pasture. The hose was still there, still flowing, still carrying his water across the fence line. He knelt beside it, touched it, made sure it was real. It was. Then he drove back to the barn, opened the gate to the north pasture where his herd was grazing, and gently, quietly, redirected them toward the fence line. Not driven, redirected. There was a difference. The cattle moved slowly in the pre-dawn darkness, curious more than anything. They smelled water on the other side. They smelled the lush vegetation. They moved toward it with the patient determination of creatures who knew what they wanted. Marcus opened the gap in the fence, the same gap Victoria had cut for her hose, and stepped aside. The first cow went through at a walk, her massive frame just fitting through the opening. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, 50 head of cattle were flowing into Victoria's yard like a slow, patient flood. 50 animals that weighed between 1,000 and 1,400 pounds each, moving with the inevitable momentum of nature. Marcus watched from his side of the fence, coffee cup in hand, as the morning light began to break across the horizon. The screaming started at 6:47 a.m. It was a sound that Marcus had never heard before, a woman's voice at the absolute edge of panic, pushed past reason into pure animal terror. He heard it from half a mile away, from his kitchen where he was making scrambled eggs, and he almost dropped the pan. Victoria's voice cut through the morning air like a siren. "No! No, 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 no! Get away! Get away from my house!" More screaming. Then, unmistakably, the crash of something large meeting a vinyl fence, the fence that separated her yard from her neighbor's. Then another crash, and the sound of splintering wood. Marcus set down his spatula and walked to the window. From this distance, he couldn't see the details, but he could see the outline of cattle moving through Victoria's yard. He could see her figure in what looked like a pink bathrobe, waving her arms. He could see the fence separating her property from the one next door bowing outward, and then giving way. The cattle were advancing. He'd known this might happen. Fences between suburban properties were notoriously fragile. Vinyl and thin posts meant to look pretty, not to contain a herd of panicked or determined livestock. He'd gambled that Victoria's fences wouldn't hold. And his gamble was paying off. Within minutes, the cattle had moved from her yard into her neighbor's, a woman named Carol who worked as an accountant downtown. Then into Carol's neighbors beyond that. The phone rang exactly 30 seconds after the first fence collapsed. "This is Sheriff's Department. Can I help you?" The voice was tired, bored, ready for another Monday. "There's livestock loose in the Harmon development," said the dispatcher. "Multiple calls coming in. Approximately 50 head of cattle causing property damage and..." There was a pause as another call probably came through. "Causing a hazard to persons. Units responding." Marcus watched from his kitchen, still holding his spatula, still watching the smoke signals of chaos rising from his neighbor's property. He'd expected her to call the cops. He'd expected her to panic. What he hadn't fully anticipated was how fast things would spiral, or how many people would become involved, or how quickly his quiet morning would turn into something he couldn't control anymore. His phone rang. "Unknown number. Is this Marcus Chen?" The voice was official, clipped. "Yeah. This is Sheriff Tom Bradley. We've got a situation here with some livestock on your neighbor's property. Appears the animals came from your ranch. I need you to come down here and help us secure these animals before someone gets hurt." "They're not my animals," Marcus said, the lie settling onto his tongue like something natural. "They got out on their own. Fence came down in the drought." There was a long pause. "The fence between your property and Victoria Harmon's?" "Yeah, been damaged. I hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet." Another pause, longer this time. Sheriff Bradley knew something wasn't adding up, but without clear evidence, he couldn't prove it. "Be that as it may, they're your herd, your responsibility. Get down here and help me get them secured before someone gets hurt. Harmon's threatening to press charges about the property damage. Carol Mitchell's fence is demolished, and I've got at least 3 neighbors calling about damages." 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled up to find his quiet rural neighborhood transformed into a disaster scene. Cattle were everywhere, in yards, on sidewalks, one standing on top of a toppled section of Victoria's ornamental garden. Carol's fence was indeed demolished, reduced to fragments of white vinyl scattered across the lawn like the bones of some slaughtered animal. Victoria's pristine landscaping was destroyed, plants trampled, grass torn up to reveal mud underneath. Her little water feature, probably meant to showcase her stolen water, cracked down the middle, and Victoria herself stood on her front porch in that pink bathrobe, screaming at a deputy while a large brown cow calmly ate the flowers from the planter box beside her door. "This is insane." Victoria was gesturing wildly. "These animals are dangerous. I could have been killed. This is negligence. This is—" She spotted Marcus pulling up in his truck and her face went white with understanding. The screaming stopped. It was worse than the screaming. She stared at him across 20 yards of destroyed landscaping, and in that moment he saw it register. The deliberate parking of his truck, the convenience of the timing, the way he'd suddenly had cattle problems on the exact day she'd had fence problems. "You did this," she said quietly. Marcus turned to Sheriff Bradley. "Let's get these animals contained, Sheriff. You did this on purpose." Victoria's voice was rising again. "This is intentional. This is sabotage. This is a crime." "Lady," Sheriff Bradley said calmly, "your insurance company might be more interested in how you cut a fence on the neighbor's property to install an irrigation line than they would be in talking about some cattle wandering through. You want to press charges? I'm going to have to file a report about the hose situation, too." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. For the next 6 hours, Marcus and a crew of ranch hands he called worked to herd the cattle back across the property lines. Some went easily. Some had gotten territorial about the good grass and suburban landscaping and had to be roped and sedated. 3 had to be transported in a trailer after tangling in a decorative wrought iron fence. By early afternoon, all 50 head were back in Marcus's pasture. The gap in his fence had been barricaded with temporary panels. The police report had been filed, not about the cattle invasion, but about the fence damage and property destruction, with a note from Sheriff Bradley that the livestock had escaped due to prior damage that the owner had failed to repair. What he didn't mention was the hose. By 2 p.m., the scene had cleared. The deputies were gone. The cattle were settled. Carol Mitchell was taking photos of her destroyed fence for insurance purposes, and Victoria Harmon stood alone in her demolished yard, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect suburban dream, while the hose, that green hose, still lay in the grass, disconnected and useless. Marcus watched from his truck as she stood there, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the damage. $60,000 worth of landscaping destroyed, her reputation in the neighborhood ruined, her smug certainty shattered, and the thing was, he hadn't technically done anything wrong. He'd left a gate open. His cattle had wandered. It was an accident. Negligence at worst, not sabotage. The hose was still on the ground. She'd have to look at it every day, that symbol of her theft, lying there in the wreckage of her choices. Marcus drove back to his ranch feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: lighter. 3 days later, Marcus received a certified letter from Victoria's lawyer. The letter was dense with legal language, but the essential message was clear. Victoria was suing him for $127,000 in damages, including the destroyed landscaping, fencing repairs, medical expenses. Apparently, the stress had caused her to seek psychiatric care, and emotional distress sustained during the incident. She was also filing a police complaint for intentional property destruction and reckless endangerment. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, hands shaking, reading the letter 3 times to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding. The coffee had gone cold. The morning light was streaming through windows that suddenly felt too fragile. His phone rang. It was Sheriff Bradley. "I need you to know that Victoria Harmon filed a formal complaint," the sheriff said without preamble. "She's claiming you intentionally opened your gates to let the cattle loose as an act of revenge for the waterline situation." "Do you have any proof of that, Sheriff?" "I don't. What I have is a broken fence, your property, and an incident that occurred under suspicious circumstances. I also have the hose situation, which I didn't file any report on because I figured you two could work it out like neighbors. But now I'm wondering if I made a mistake in not documenting it." Marcus's chest tightened. "You could go back and file something." "I could. That would contradict my notes about an accidental gate opening. It would look like I'm part of some cover-up. Juries don't like that, Marcus. And you know what? She's got a lawyer, and now it's not about the hose anymore. It's about whether you deliberately destroyed her property." After he hung up, Marcus sat in silence for a very long time. The legal machinery had turned. He'd set it in motion, and now it had a momentum of its own. He could go to his own lawyer, Patricia, but she'd already told him how expensive this would be. Tens of thousands, probably. Legal fees to defend a suit that might or might not have merit. He wondered not for the first time if he'd made a terrible mistake. The next week brought more complications. A local news outlet picked up the story. Neighborhood dispute escalates into livestock incident. They interviewed Victoria, who appeared in professional makeup, speaking about her terror and trauma with the kind of practiced delivery that suggested she'd rehearsed. They didn't interview Marcus. They didn't mention the hose. Property values in the development dropped 3%, according to one estimate. Carol Mitchell, whose fence had been destroyed, initially seemed sympathetic, but then stopped returning Marcus's calls after her insurance company suggested she might have a case against him too, given the negligent fence situation. The water issue became local legend. Someone at the feed store told someone at the hardware store, and by the end of the week, everyone in the county knew about the farmer and the woman who'd stolen his water. Sympathies were mixed. Some people thought Marcus was a hero for standing up to suburban encroachment. Others thought he was reckless for not maintaining his property better. But the legal machinery didn't care about public opinion. It cared about facts, documentation, and evidence. 2 weeks into the lawsuit, Victoria's lawyer filed a motion for punitive damages, claiming that Marcus's actions had been intentional and malicious. His lawyer, Patricia, who'd agreed to take his case for a discounted rate that was still astronomical, warned him that if he lost, the damages could double or triple. "We need to find proof that she cut the fence," Patricia said during a consultation in her office. "We need documentation that she installed the hose. We need her on record acknowledging the theft. Without that, we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back." "She'll never admit to it," Marcus said. "Then we're in trouble." The anxiety started affecting his sleep. He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. What if he lost the case? What if he had to sell the ranch? What if this, his final connection to his father, his family, his past, was taken from him because of one moment of rage? And the worst part was that Victoria had left her hose behind. Marcus discovered it one morning when he was checking the fence. She disconnected it from his line, but it was still coiled in her yard, a physical piece of evidence just lying there. All he had to do was walk over and grab it. Bring it to his lawyer. Prove the theft, but he couldn't do it. The thought of trespassing on her property, of escalating this further, of being the first to cross the line into true criminality, made his stomach turn. What was he going to do? Steal the hose back? Plant it somewhere? That would only make him look more guilty. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Marcus got a call from his daughter. Lily was living in Portland now, working as a therapist. They didn't talk much. She'd been angry with him for a long time after her mother left, as if the ranch and his stubborn dedication to it were somehow his fault, as if he could have forced his wife to stay. "Dad, I heard about what happened. Mom called me. She's worried about you. Tell her I'm fine. You're getting sued. You might lose the ranch. That's not fine." It was worth it. He said it, but he didn't believe it anymore. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you let your anger destroy your life over some woman stealing water, and now you're going to lose everything fighting about it. He didn't have a good answer for that. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done since his wife left. He cried. Alone in his kitchen, with a bottle of whiskey getting warmer beside him, he cried about his mistakes, his stubbornness, and the possibility that his father's legacy, this ranch, this life, might be destroyed by his own hand. But the machinery kept grinding. It came from an unexpected source. Carol Mitchell, the neighbor whose fence had been destroyed, called Marcus 4 weeks into the lawsuit. Her tone was different now, cautious but purposeful. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "Not on the phone. Can you come by my place?" Carol's house was neat and organized, just like Marcus would have imagined for an accountant. She let him into her kitchen and offered him coffee, which he declined. "I've been thinking about this situation," she said carefully, "about the lawsuit, about how it all happened. Okay, I'm not a confrontational person. I just want you to know that. I don't like lawsuits or drama or any of this." She pulled out her phone and opened a photo app. "But I have a Ring camera on my gate. It's been there for 6 months, recording footage. I look back through the footage." She showed him the screen. It was a time-stamped video from early August. It showed Victoria Harmon with a group of workers cutting through the fence between Marcus's property and hers. It showed them unrolling the hose. It showed them installing a valve junction on Marcus's water line. The quality was clear enough to see Victoria's face, clear enough to see her smiling at one of the workers, clear enough to see her running a test flow of water and looking satisfied with the result. Marcus stared at the screen. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked quietly. "Because I talked to my insurance adjuster. They denied my claim." Carol's voice was tight with her own frustration. "They said that since the property damage was caused by your negligence, the broken fence, I can't collect. But they also said that if someone had intentionally created a situation that caused the damage, that would be different. That would be fraud on my part to collect for it." She looked at him directly. "I talked to a friend who's a lawyer. She said that video is evidence of Victoria committing theft and fraud. She said it might change things for your case." "Why would you help me?" "Because I'm angry." Carol's voice was cold in a way he hadn't expected. "I'm angry that she cut my fence, too. I just didn't realize it until the insurance company explained it to me. I'm angry that she thinks she can steal water, destroy my property, and then blame you for it. And I'm angry that she's going to come out of this whole thing looking like a victim." She transferred the video file to a USB drive and handed it to him. "My lawyer said the camera was recording. For lawful purposes in my own yard. The footage is mine to share, and I'm choosing to share it with you." Within 24 hours, the video was in Patricia's hands. Patricia watched it, then watched it again. Then she called Marcus. "This changes everything," she said. "This is documentation of intentional theft. This establishes motive for whatever happened with the cattle. More importantly, this establishes that she was committing fraud when she filed this lawsuit. She knew exactly what she'd done. What do we do with it? We counterfile. We prove she was stealing your water. We prove she's the one who committed the crime, not you. And we let the other side know that if they want to take this to trial, we have evidence that will destroy her credibility completely." The countersuit was filed 2 days later. It was smaller in scope, just damages for the stolen water, costs of repair, and attorney fees. But it was backed by irrefutable video evidence. Victoria's lawyer called Patricia within 4 hours. The settlement offer came by the end of business. Victoria would drop her lawsuit entirely. She would pay Marcus $35,000 to cover his legal fees and the value of the stolen water. She would agree to a binding arbitration clause preventing any future disputes, and both parties would sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing them from discussing the matter publicly. "What should I tell him?" Patricia asked, meaning Victoria's lawyer. Marcus thought about it for a long moment. He thought about the cattle, the destroyed fence, the lawsuit, the anxiety, the sleepless nights. He thought about Victoria's perfect house and her stolen water and her perfect lawn grown from theft. He thought about what his father would have done. "Tell him I accept," Marcus said, "on one condition." "What condition?" "He has to publicly remove the hose from the fence line and apologize to the neighborhood for the water theft. It's all part of the settlement, non-negotiable." Patricia laughed for the first time since he'd hired her. "I'll ask, but I don't think they'll go for it." They did go for it. Maybe Victoria's lawyer convinced her that public humiliation was better than a trial. Maybe she'd finally understood the depth of her own mistake. Maybe she just wanted it over. The apology was short and stilted, delivered at a neighborhood association meeting on a Wednesday evening. Victoria stood in front of 50 people, Marcus included, and acknowledged that she had, without permission, drawn water from the neighboring property and that she took full responsibility for the confusion that followed. She didn't specifically mention the cattle. Nobody needed her to. The hose was removed that same night. Marcus watched from his property as a landscaper came and disconnected the remaining line, coiled it up, and threw it in a truck. The settlement check arrived 3 weeks later. $35,000. It wasn't enough to fix everything. He'd still owe Patricia fees, and the legal costs had been brutal, but it was enough to repair the fence, catch up on some deferred maintenance, and breathe a little easier. For about a week, Marcus felt something that resembled relief. Then the nightmare started. 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized, Marcus noticed the first cow acting strangely. It was a Jersey named Maple, one of his older animals, gentle and reliable. She was standing in the water trough area, but not drinking, just staring at the water like it had personally offended her. Her coat was rougher than usual. When Marcus approached her, she didn't greet him the way she normally did. "Hey, girl," he said, running a hand along her side. "What's wrong?" She was warm, very warm. He took her temperature, 104.2 degrees, fever. Within 2 days, 3 more cattle were showing symptoms. High fever, lethargy, lack of appetite. Marcus called his veterinarian, Dr. Rachel Wong, who came out on a Saturday morning. She examined the animals carefully, drawing blood samples, running physical checks. Her expression grew more troubled with each animal. "When did you start seeing symptoms?" she asked. 3 days ago. Just the one at first. Now it's 4. Any changes to their environment recently? New feed, different water source, anything unusual?" Marcus hesitated. "We had some cattle loose in the neighborhood a few weeks ago. They were in some suburban yards for a few hours." Dr. Wong's eyes narrowed. "What kind of yards?" "Neighborhood yards, landscaped. I herded them back pretty quick." "Marcus, did they have access to any treated plants? Pesticides, fertilizers, anything like that?" The realization hit him like a physical blow. The suburban landscaping, the ornamental plants, the flower beds, the perfectly maintained lawns that required chemicals and treatments and poisons, all things designed to keep suburban yards pristine. "Maybe," he said slowly. "Why?" "I'm running some tests, but I'm worried we might be dealing with plant toxicity. Pesticide accumulation maybe, or exposure to something toxic while they were in those yards. Depending on what they got into, the effects could show up weeks later, especially if they ingested contaminated forage that's been working through their system." 2 days later, the diagnosis was confirmed. The cattle had consumed contaminated feed, probably ornamental plants treated with pesticides, while loose in the neighborhood. The chemicals had accumulated in their systems, and now they were showing signs of poisoning. "How bad?" Marcus asked. "Bad," Dr. Wong said. "I'm treating them with supportive care, but if any more start showing symptoms, we might be looking at a significant loss. At minimum, you need to assume all 50 head were potentially exposed. Some might be latent. Some might never show symptoms if they only ate small amounts. But until we know, you need to treat this like a quarantine situation." He couldn't sell the cattle. He couldn't use them for breeding. He couldn't move them to different pastures without knowing which ones were affected. He was essentially stuck with a potentially poisoned herd that might take weeks or months to sort out. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. He'd sent the cattle into Victoria's yard to punish her theft. Instead, his cattle had been poisoned by her suburban existence, the pesticides and chemicals and treatments that came with maintaining a perfect suburban lawn. And now he was paying the price. 2 of the 4 animals showing severe symptoms had to be euthanized. Dr. Wong came out in the early morning darkness to handle it, and Marcus stood in the barn afterward, feeling something like breaking inside him. He called Patricia. "Can I sue her for this?" he asked. There was a long pause. "For what, specifically?" "She didn't put chemicals in your cattle's mouths. She has a pesticide-treated yard." My cattle got into it. "They got poisoned." "Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I'm saying this as someone who's been in your corner." Patricia's voice was careful. "You're looking for ways to hurt her back. That's understandable after everything that's happened. But you've already won. You got a settlement. You got her to admit she was wrong publicly. You got your justice. My cattle are dying because they ate ornamental plants from residential properties. That's not Victoria's fault. That's an accident. A terrible accident, but an accident." Patricia paused. "If you pursue this, you'll look like you're trying to squeeze more money out of her. The non-disclosure agreement means you can't even talk about the original settlement without violating it. The court's going to see this as harassment. And honestly, Marcus, it's going to hurt your case more than it helps." After he hung up, Marcus sat in the barn for hours, surrounded by the smell of hay and animal and things he couldn't control. The next morning, a truck pulled up to Victoria's house. Through his binoculars, and yes, he was absolutely watching, Marcus saw landscapers arriving to rip out all the ornamental plantings. New non-toxic plants were installed. The lawn treatment stopped. By afternoon, her yard had been transformed into something safe, something that posed no danger. She was protecting herself. He couldn't blame her, really. She'd consulted a lawyer just like he had. That lawyer had probably told her about the risk of liability for the poisoning, about the importance of eliminating obvious hazards. She was doing what anyone rational would do, but watching her eliminate the threat felt like another small defeat. By December, 4 months after the cattle incident, the situation had stabilized into something resembling normal, though nothing felt quite normal anymore. 12 of the 50 cattle had shown some signs of the poisoning: lethargy, strange behavior, digestive issues. 2 were dead. 10 had recovered with supportive care. The remaining 38 appeared to be unaffected. Dr. Wong theorized that they'd been in different parts of Victoria's yard when they'd had access, and some had eaten more contaminated forage than others. The financial hit was significant. Veterinary bills, replacement breeding stock, lost productivity. The settlement money had mostly gone to legal fees and vet expenses. Marcus was, once again, barely getting by, but he was getting by. On a cold Tuesday morning, exactly 4 months to the day after the cattle incident, Marcus found something on his property. It was a letter, left on the fence post near the gate. No envelope, just a letter, weighed down with a stone. His name was written on the outside in handwriting he didn't recognize. He unfolded it carefully. "Marcus, I've wanted to write this for a long time, but I didn't know how or if I should. Dr. Wong spoke to me after you brought the cattle to her for evaluation. She told me about the poisoning. She didn't give me details. I think she felt conflicted about it, but she told me enough that I understood what had happened. I deserve what happened to your cattle." "I know that." "I stole your water. I lied about it. I let myself believe that because you lived differently than I did, you didn't matter. I convinced myself that I had a right to take from you. That's not true. It was never true. I'm leaving this neighborhood. My house is going on the market next week. I had the opportunity to buy a place in the city where I work. I've been putting it off because I didn't want to admit defeat. Didn't want to give you the satisfaction of knowing I'm running away. But I realize that's not really why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I can't look at my yard anymore without remembering what I did. I'm leaving because every time I see my gate, I think about your cattle and your vet bills. I'm leaving because this place represents something in me that I don't like very much. The landscaping I had ripped out, I'm donating the replacement cost to a local agricultural fund in your county. It won't fix anything. I know that. Nothing can fix the cattle I poisoned. But it felt like the right thing to do. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me either. But I wanted you to know that I see what I did now. I see it clearly. And I'm sorry. Victoria Marcus read the letter twice, then sat on the fence post in the cold December air and just held it. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel vindication. What he felt was tired, deeply bone-achingly tired. Tired of the fight, tired of the anger, tired of the entire situation. He thought about what his father would have done differently. Probably just fixed the fence better in the first place. Probably just called the cops when he saw the hose. Probably approached it with the kind of direct, simple justice that didn't require elaborate schemes or cattle invasions or months of legal warfare. But Marcus had never been quite as wise as his father. In the spring of the next year, with Victoria gone and a new family moving into the corner house, quiet people who seemed to mind their own business, Marcus stood at the fence line and looked at his property. The ranch didn't look any different than it had before. The cattle were recovering. The fence had been repaired. The grass was growing. Lily came to visit that summer, her first visit in 2 years. She helped him mend fence, helped him move cattle, and sat with him on the porch at dusk, watching the light fade over the fields. I heard the woman who stole the water left, Lily said. Yeah? Are you glad? Marcus considered the question seriously. No, not glad exactly, but I'm done being angry about it. What changed? I realized that anger was the only thing keeping me connected to her. Once I let go of that, she didn't matter anymore. She was just a person who made bad choices and then she left. End of story, Lily smiled. It was the first time in 2 years that Marcus had seen her smile at him without distance in it. They sat in silence as the sun descended, as the cattle settled into the evening rhythm, as the ranch breathed around them in a way that felt eternal and unchanging, at least for now. Marcus thought about water and theft and cattle and justice and how sometimes the most bitter victories taste exactly like defeat. He thought about his father and his wife and his daughter and all the things he'd almost lost because of pride and rage and his own stubborn need to prove something. And in the quiet of that evening, he finally understood what his father might have known all along, that the best revenge isn't elaborate or clever or complicated. The best revenge is simply enduring. It's showing up every morning to your own life and making it mean something. It's taking care of what's yours and letting go of what isn't. The ranch stretched out before him, acres of land that his family had worked for generations. It wasn't perfect. It would probably never be perfect, but it was real, and it was his, and that was enough. As the stars began to appear overhead, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness exactly, that was maybe too grand a word for what he felt toward Victoria. But something like acceptance, a recognition that the whole mess was over, that he'd survived it, and that life was going to keep moving forward whether he was angry about the past or not. Lily put her head on his shoulder, and they watched the night come in together. Two people learning to forgive not just others, but themselves.